Hello, everyone. I am Luke Reinhardt. Welcome to Closing the Gap, a podcast dedicated to your growth. Brought to you by Wellspring Coaching Services and hosted by myself and my wife, Katie. You know, people have gaps that prevent them from growing. Our goal is to empower you to close those gaps by increasing your awareness, confidence, and clarity. Join us today as we help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Hello guys, welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Closing the Gap Growth Podcasts. This time we're going to be talking about creating distance. So as a quick recap from our last episode, we talked about closing the gap and how that related to your personal growth journey, achieving your goals. We talked about the 8 prevention gaps, things that prevent us from being able to close the gap between where we are and where we want to be, right? It's very crucial that we identify what our prevention gap is. We all have prevention gaps, don't we?
Yes, we do. Sometimes more than one.
Yeah. And, those gaps, unless we identify them, we're not going to be able to close them effectively. So it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve our goals unless we are practicing awareness and honesty and doing our best to discover what our gaps are.
Right.
What things are keeping us. So hopefully you guys thought about that a little bit from last time. Which prevention gaps are keeping you or preventing you from closing the gap? As we talked about closing the gap, we did speak about how my experience in jiu-jitsu and closing the gap, how when you close the gap in jiu-jitsu or in self-defense, you're practicing distance management.
Right.
And one of your main goals is to either be too far away to get hurt or to be in too close to get hurt. And so that's that process of closing the gap from point A to point A, too far away, to point B, into close, right? And it's that gap in the middle where you're most vulnerable in that situation. So that space between point A and point B, the gap, that's where I'm most vulnerable to my opponent's attacks, to getting hurt. And I have to be able and willing, and I also have to be knowledgeable enough to know how to safely and effectively close that gap. I have to go through that danger zone in order to do it. Once I've gotten the clinch, then I can be safe there again and avoid too much damage.
Right.
But sometimes it's important to also create distance. You might be trying to close the gap sometimes, and your opponent's giving you resistance, and you're just going to get beat up if you are hesitating to go in, or you're going in and it's not working out. So sometimes you have to create that distance to be safe, and of course that relates to pursuing our goals in life and how we pursue closing those gaps in life. Because again, if we're trying to close the gap and we kind of hit a rough spot, or we hit resistance, we hit an obstacle, sometimes we need to just work through that. But then other times we're hitting like that brick wall.
Right.
We might actually be in the danger zone. We don't want to stay there. So the gap is a necessary vulnerable space that we have to break through, that we have to work through in order to achieve our goals. But it's not a place that we're meant to stay. We're not meant to stay in the gap, right? We want to always be too far away or in too close, creating distance or closing the gap. So our focus today is creating distance.
Okay, so just to sort of redefine from last time, we focused so much on, and I'm asking you to speak into this, but we focused a lot on the fact that we have a gap and we're identifying. We have this gap. We even talked about naming the gap. And so now we're sort of switching it up, saying, okay, maybe the goal was to close that gap, but in this case, there's times when we want to expand and push away and create. Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking a lot about closing the gap. That's why we named the podcast Closing the Gap.
Yeah.
Like that forward motion, right?
Right.
Of personal growth or, obtaining goals. But with that self-defense background, once again, this kind of just falls also under the distance management concept.
Distance management, yes.
So distance management is either closing the gap and being too close or creating distance.
Yes, okay.
And creating distance is very important sometimes
Yep.
in relationships.
Right.
Sometimes we have certain addictions that we need to create distance from, or
Yep.
certain things that we're doing that are just aren't good for our health.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, so and at times we know we need to close the gap, right? And at other times it's more important to create enough space so that we're not in a vulnerable, weakened situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it a lot of times as like you asking the questions like, if I'm trying to close the gap on something, you know, maybe I have a goal set and I'm trying to close that gap from point A to point B, and maybe I'm having some resistance, right? But we need to ask ourselves sometimes in that time, is this healthy for me to continue pursuing closing the gap, or is it unhealthy? And something that might make it unhealthy would be, okay, I'm trying really hard to close this gap. It's taking longer than I thought. I'm having to work harder. And so I have way less time with my family.
Right. Sacrifice of priorities in order to.
Yeah. That might be one example,
Right.
you know, where, you know, but if it might be healthy for me to move forward in a circumstance where maybe I don't want to, but maybe I'm a little afraid or a little lazy, where it would be unhealthy for me to stop at that point because it's not character building, right? It would be more healthy for me to push through some circumstances and build character.
Yeah, and this takes high-level self-awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also requires tuning in to your priorities, being aware of what your priorities are. It's sort of making that pro and con list for things. I'm a big fan of the pro and con list.
Yeah?
I call it the pro and pro list.
The pro and pro list.
Yeah, so if you have two choices, you kind of work through all the pros of one, like option one, or all the pros of option two. I don't like to think of the negative, but the negative sort of implied in there. So, in other words, if you had two job offers, the pros of this one, the pros of this one, right? And so all things considered, the cons, you may need to record those as well. But all things considered, looking at my priorities, looking at knowing my own weaknesses, my own temptations. You brought up addiction too. That's another piece. Things where I might be pulled into unhealthy spaces. Just really cataloging those things and then going at the end of the day, all things considered, option A is the best choice for me. So, yeah.
So where do you think sometimes we might have to create distance in relationships? Like what might be an example of why we would have to create distance in a relationship? Because it's good, obviously, to pursue relationships. And there might be certain people in your life that you want to kind of close that gap on. You want to draw nearer to. And that's good, but there also are times where we actually need to create distance in certain relationships.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think being aware of how you're feeling in the presence of other person and being aware of like what your response is to the other person, how you're feeling physically, mentally, emotionally at the end of a conversation or interaction with a person, whether that's at work or whether that's at home, friendships, whatever the relationship. This could be a variety. Just cataloging that and taking note of it. And then sort of looking at, bottom line, is this healthy or is this unhealthy, this relationship? And that could take some support from others, some conversations with other people, some real sort of like journaling, soul searching kind of thing to really identify what's going on. So if you're around a particular person on a regular basis and or maybe not even a regular basis, whenever you see this person, you start to feel something inside. We talk a lot about this in self-defense because we've done a lot of work in self-defense, is how God's really given all of us this innate warning system in our bodies to kind of let us know when something's off, and that culturally we really don't especially with children, we've done a really poor job of validating and confirming for them those natural responses that they're having. That if it's not done as a child and, then your middle age years and then later, you can go through your entire life without really knowing how that system's working in your body, that sort of warning system. And
Right.
so we've done a lot of work around that. So I would say just tune in first to how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and if you get to a point where you're sensing this isn't healthy, then it's, okay, maybe it's time to create some distance here, some boundaries.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah. It's kind of coming to my head right now, and I'm trying to think of the actual resource, but in one of John Maxwell's resources, he talks about relationships in the sense of adders and subtractors and multipliers and dividers.
Yeah.
So it's like, in a relationship, generally you want to have some give and take, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be certain relationships where, as parents, we're going to be obviously naturally just pouring in more and giving more, and that's the way that should be. But in a mutual adult relationship where we're both capable of giving, it shouldn't necessarily work that way, right?
Right.
We should have give and take, and some people are people who add to a relationship, and then some people are people who kind of take away in a relationship. They're always trying to receive and take, and then you have people who are multiplying relationships. They're like, okay, I want to introduce you to my other friends and try to grow the community a little bit. And then you have people who actually are dividing communities and dividing relationships, dividing families, whatever it may be.
I feel a blog post coming on, because I've written something about this before, and I called it Producers, Consumers, and Decomposers. And this is based on just kind of science terms, right? We teach this in science. Producers, and in relationships, if you apply that, a producer, like you said, is going to multiply, going to give back. There's going to be a return on your give. Consumers are going to be those who are more just kind of taking. They're taking back from the relationship. They're consuming what's being given. And there are, like you said, with children, that's very, that's sort of what happens. You parent, they're consuming, and you expect that. And then there's this awful level where it's like decomposers who are actually tearing you down personally or tearing down relationships, like you said, being divisive. And that's like a whole nother almost malevolent level of relating to another human being that I would say, really pay attention to that if you've identified someone in your life who's a decomposer, and maybe your instinct is to help and heal. Just check that for a second. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to serve other people and to want to help people get out of difficult situations. But it's also, I strongly believe we teach people how to treat us. And I think knowing that like you have innate value and that it's important to say, I know I have innate value, you have innate value. This is what I think is reasonable for our relationship, and can you meet me in that place? Right. And if the answer is no, or if it's constantly they need more, they're taking or they're tearing down, you don't necessarily have to hold a grudge, right? We want to forgive, but we also don't necessarily want to be putting ourselves in that situation on a constant basis, because it will affect your health. It will affect your mental, physical, spiritual health.
And it's not an easy decision to make, right? Like
no,
it's something
not.
that you really have to think through and evaluate.
Yeah.
It's not like just this quick, some situations maybe if you're physically abused or being verbally abused, things like that, you might have to immediately cut ties with somebody. But yeah, sometimes it can be a very tricky. You don't realize the abuse that's going on in a relationship sometimes,
right? And
you really do have to become aware of that, and take the necessary steps for your health and for the health of the other person, because to allow them to continue doing that is not good for them either. Right.
Enabling that kind of destructive behavior isn't good. You're giving them dignity by saying, I believe that if I bring this to your attention, there's the possibility of change here, a change for a healthy trajectory for you. And so you're giving them dignity by expressing, hey, this doesn't feel healthy to me, the way this interaction is going on. Can we talk through it? Can we work through it? And if the answer is no, or if you get slashed in the process, belittled or degraded, right there, that's a little bit of a sign, a big sign really to you that like there's a problem here, because I have innate value, they have innate value. I'm coming to them in this, from a place or a position that you are of value and you are of worth. And if they're not taking that in that vein or turning it around to an abusive stance, then it's a big warning flag, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Henner Gracie, he's a famous jiu-jitsu artist from the legendary Gracie family. And he talks about something called a punch power scale. So just relating this to self-defense again, that's, it's what I do. So I make the connections that way. So hopefully you can follow with me. But the punch power scale is like a 1 to 10 scale. So let's just say that you're too far away to get hurt. That's like a 0, right? There's no damage being done, right? So the closer I draw into my opponent, then the numbers would kind of go up, right? But then there's a point where when I actually do clench, I'm wrapping them up, I'm staying very connected, where that scale goes back down again. So if I'm in too close to get hurt, like they might be able to smack me a little bit, but it's nothing that's going to do any serious damage. So maybe numbers like 1, 2, 3, maybe even up to number 5 could happen sometimes when you're clinching. But those are things that I'm not too overly concerned about, right? And I'm kind of expecting, in a self-defense situation, mixed martial arts situation or whatever.
Yeah.
But numbers 6 to 10, where, the punches are actually doing some damage, where 10 being like the knockout power.
Yeah.
I want to avoid that at all times.
Yeah.
In self-defense, in mixed martial arts or whatever. And so if you relate that to this same relational thing that we're talking about, if you find yourself in a relationship where you're getting hit by numbers 6 through 10, you really do have to start paying attention.
Yeah. You can't sustain that.
Yeah.
In a fight or in a relationship, you cannot sustain that. You're going to be knocked out.
Yeah. But you should expect in a relationship to get banged up, numbers 1 through 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a normal part of
Yes, good analogy. I like that.
And growing in relationships is that you're going to get bumped up a little bit. You're going to suffer a little bit. You're going to have conflict.
Right.
And struggle. But it's that 6 to 10 scale where it's like, there's some pretty serious damage going on at this point, and it has very disastrous potential.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great analogy, because you're right. And a lot of that 1 through 5 that you're talking about, I would say, is not always intentional by the other person either. You can get hurt, and there was no intention of you getting hurt, but it's still a legitimate place of hurt. Maybe a comment was made, maybe something was neglected, maybe you had an expectation and it wasn't met, all these things. But usually 1 through 5 is redeemable. When you say
absolutely.
You can redeem, you can recover, like for those of you who are like fighters or are listening and do any kind of sports, really, when you get knocked down or you get caught off guard or somebody takes the ball from you, whatever it is, a lot of that is redeemable. But there's a certain point where you're down for the count, and that's a big deal. And when you're down, I wish I had the whiteboard behind me because I like to draw. But when you're down, everybody connected to your wheel, so to speak, is affected by that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you're letting one relationship continually knock you down.
Well, if you as a mother,
right,
who obviously has a big role in the family of helping take care of the family. If you have a relationship outside of our immediate family that's tearing you down and beating you up, then it's totally going to affect your ability to take care of your family.
That's right. And we need to show up. Like parents need to show up. Every member of society has a place, right? And is valuable. And if they're being hurt in any way, they're not able to show up and create that like beautiful collage or quilt, so to speak, that we need to have a sustainable, healthy community.
Right.
Whether that's in where we live in Frederick or in Maryland, in the United States, globally. I mean, we're so connected now globally more than ever in history. And we all know, I'm sure pretty much everyone's heard statistics about social media, and how a comment, even from a stranger that you don't know, can just be so devastating because we're so connected, but yet we don't really know the person. And those of us who, I have deliberately chosen to stay off most social media because I'm aware of the fact that empathically I will be affected by other comments people make to other people, and not just to me. It's not so that I don't, feel like I can't handle that, but it would affect me, I think, for sure. But more just the way other people are treating other people. I mean, that will bother me for hours, and where it takes me out of being able to show up for my job, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so this punch power scale, it's the same principle, whether it be in relationships or it's just us trying to pursue a certain goal.
Okay.
Some achievement.
Yeah.
We should expect the numbers 1 through 5 in that. And if we're, taking hits number 1 to 5 and pursuing a goal, then I would say then it's still probably a healthy goal to pursue. But if we're, taking numbers 6 to 10 all the time in that pursuit, then it's probably not such a healthy goal to pursue. And that's one way you can answer that question: is this healthy or unhealthy? Whether it be in a relationship or in a certain specific goal pursuit, something that you're chasing after. Another thing, though, that we want to pay attention to is addictions, things like addictions, something that may be affecting you in your life or controlling you in your life right now that you want to practice creating distance from, right? It could be social media. It could be alcohol. It could be smoking. It could be pornography. It could be shopping. It could be one of many different. It could be your, a certain diet, that you just need to change up a little bit. But it could be many things. But obviously, those are things. Anything that is controlling you, you are a slave to, right? And that's not healthy. So we want to be able to create distance in those situations, and that might even require some accountability as well. And it's going to look different, relationally, how you create distance in a pursuit of a goal, in an addiction. That's hard to say. In an addiction, based on what the relationship is, who it's with, or based on what the addiction is, this process of creating distance could look a lot different, depending.
Well, I would say more often than not, an addiction is taking the place of a relationship.
Yeah.
You could say I'm having a relationship. Obviously with pornography, there's some kind of a relationship going on between the viewer and the object being viewed. Something's happening there in the connection, right? Same with shopping. There's a feedback to getting something that you see, that you want. All of the addictions, the alcohol, it becomes a relationship substitute for a human relationship, let's say. Yeah, it's interesting
you say that, because it could also be often the cause could be from an abusive relationship.
Sure. It seems safer.
Yeah.
Right. You've been hurt by humans.
Yeah.
Why not go for this non-human substance to connect with that makes me feel good, right?
Yep.
So even in the same, so let's just pretend the addiction is a relationship, right? And we go back to the producer, consumer, decomposer. Is that particular vice that you're addicted to, is it producing good in you?
Right.
Real good, real sustainable good. Is it decomposing? Most of the time, it's it's consuming you too. We know, you can evaluate on the lines of, is this consuming my time, my energy, my passions, my body, whatever.
Right.
And more often than not, when it's an addiction, it's decomposing. So yeah.
Yeah. So guys, the bottom line is this: in life, we have to learn to manage the distance.
Yeah.
We have to either close the gap. And learning how to do that safely and effectively is very important. Having a game plan to do that, identifying your gaps, having a game plan to close those gaps is very important.
Yeah.
And then other times we need to create distance, and a good question to ask about yourself when it comes to, should I continue closing the gap? Should I keep pursuing, or should I close the distance? Is what I'm doing healthy or unhealthy? Is it leading me to a healthy place or an unhealthy place, a safe place or a dangerous place? You know, I mean, danger sometimes is part of healthy pursuit, but
right. Long-term danger, damaging. Yeah.
So yeah, we need to practice awareness in these situations,
I think so too.
And just kind of pay attention to things that are going on. You know, and sometimes we have to talk that through with others.
I think so. I think if you find right now, like you're listening to this and something's popping up right away, like I have this addiction or I have this unhealthy relationship, which is not uncommon. You know, for most of us, we're fighting these things on a pretty regular basis. Immediately, I would just show yourself grace for the fact that you're in this. It's not uncommon. And find someone to be accountable to right away, right? We have friends. Hopefully you have at least one safe person in your life that you can go to. And we don't want to make it sound like this is easy stuff to deal with. We're just bringing the conversation up and trying to bring some more awareness to those situations, putting it, what I would say, in context, creating a picture for what could be happening, and just kind of giving some words to things you may already be feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that wraps up our second episode. Season 1. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
All right.